As I scanned the restaurant, searching for the client I was supposed to meet, my eyes landed on someone I hadn't expected to see, my ex-wife, Susan. She was seated beside a slightly overweight, middle-aged man. He had the look of someone who was once fit, but years of indulgence had softened his frame. Despite that, every aspect of him exuded wealth. Susan, sitting comfortably next to him, looked content, even radiant. Standing in the foyer, I felt a wave of memories rush over me. 3 years had passed since our divorce, yet the emotions still hit me as sharply as if it had happened just yesterday. And there I was, watching from a distance, no longer the one sitting by her side. But as life had played out, her dreams had come true, while mine had crumbled. It all started with a routine business trip to Albany. I had planned to stay the night, avoiding the exhausting drive back. But barely an hour into my journey, my client called. His car had been in an accident, though thankfully, he was unharmed. Apologizing for the last-minute cancellation, he assured me it was unavoidable. I told him it was no trouble, suggesting we reschedule. Still, the thought of driving back so soon didn't sit well with me. With an unexpected 2-hour drive ahead, I adjusted my mindset. I decided to make the best of it, return home early and surprise my wife with a romantic dinner. That plan felt right. By the time I finally turned onto my street, 90 minutes later, my excitement had built up. But the moment I pulled up, something caught my attention: 3 unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway. I wasn't immediately alarmed. Susan often had friends over when I was out of town, so I assumed it was just another casual gathering. Instead of pulling into the driveway, I parked on the street and headed inside, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But the second I stepped into the living room, a different story began to unfold. Scattered across the floor were 4 sets of clothes, men's and women's. My chest tightened. Something was off. As I stood there, frozen in place, a sickening realization crept in. Then I heard it. A voice. Not a cry for help. Not a call for assistance. But a raw, unmistakable sound of pleasure. My stomach dropped. My wife wasn't alone upstairs. She was with someone, no, with multiple someones. My feet felt heavy as I made my way to the staircase, my instincts screaming at me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I hadn't heard what I just heard. But I couldn't. I had to face it. Reaching the top of the stairs, I heard it again, a deep, primal moan echoing from our bedroom. Moving carefully, I peered around the doorframe. What I saw knocked the breath out of me. 3 men. 2 were strangers, but the third? Him, I recognized all too well. Jeff Davis, her boss. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. My wife was entangled in a scene I never could have imagined. Jeff, the man I already disliked, was now even more loathsome as he lavished her with compliments, praising her for helping him secure business clients. It made my skin crawl to think that this idiot had been using my wife as both an assistant and a plaything. The way they spoke to her, the crude words, the degrading tone, it was like she wasn't even the woman I had spent 10 years of my life with. And the worst part? I found myself agreeing with Jeff's vulgar nickname for her. I backed away, moving downstairs in silence. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I needed proof, evidence of what I had just witnessed. Without thinking, I headed to my office, yanked open the safe, and grabbed my digital video camera. By some stroke of luck, it still had battery life and an old holiday tape inside. There was enough space to record. Steadying my hands, I crept back up and positioned the camera at the bedroom door, ensuring it captured everything: the faces, the voices, the betrayal. I lasted maybe 5-10 minutes before my emotions overwhelmed me. For some, a scene like this might stir excitement. For me, it was nothing but devastation. Swallowing the bile rising in my throat, I retreated downstairs, needing a moment to collect myself. In my office, my fingers instinctively went to the gun safe. I wasn't a violent man, never had been, but right then, the urge to take control of the situation burned inside me. I removed the safety, just in case. A plan started to take shape in my mind. I moved back into the living room, gathering the scattered wallets and car keys from the discarded clothing. Then, with deliberate care, I stepped outside and let the air out of every tire in the driveway, including Susan's. By the time I returned inside, a grim satisfaction settled over me. I knew exactly what was coming next. Grabbing my phone, I scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. I dialed. No answer. I called again. And again. On the fourth ring, she finally picked up. The sudden hush in the house told me everything I needed to know. She had just warned them to be silent. "Hey, Bobby, how's Albany?" Her voice was breathless, slightly shaky. In the background, I heard muffled laughter, her guests clearly struggling to keep quiet. "You sound out of breath. You okay?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Yeah. Just ran upstairs to grab my phone," she answered quickly, working to steady herself. "Well, my client canceled on me, so I'll be home soon. Want to grab dinner?" I said casually, though inside my blood was boiling. She hesitated. "You're coming home now?" "That's the plan." "Sound good?" Yeah. Just need to get ready, babe. See you soon." She hung up in a rush. I leaned against the wall, smirking. Showtime. Just as expected, 4 completely naked bodies scrambled down the stairs within moments. In a frenzy, the men dressed as fast as they could, while Susan frantically adjusted herself. The panic on their faces was almost comical as they bolted toward the door. Little did they know, their escape wasn't going to be as smooth as they'd hoped. Sue hastily slipped on her shoes and jacket, glancing nervously outside. She was hoping the men would leave before she had to, unaware that if she had been paying closer attention, she might have noticed my car parked just down the street. The moment she stepped onto the porch, the men erupted in a frantic chorus, all shouting at her at once. Just as she turned to listen, I seized my chance. I slammed the front door shut and locked it behind her. Her head snapped back toward me, eyes wide with panic as she caught a glimpse of my face through the window. She pressed her hands against the glass, her voice pleading, but I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. The time for talking was over. Meanwhile, the men had realized their predicament and stormed back onto my porch, pounding on the door, demanding their belongings. I had no intention of giving them anything. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Attempted break-in," I reported calmly. Before I could say more, the dispatcher interrupted. "Sir, we've already received a call from one of your neighbors. Officers are en route." That was a surprise. I glanced around, silently grateful that someone had already taken action. 2 minutes later, the police arrived. After questioning Sue, the officers turned to me. I wasted no time. "My wife was assaulted by these men," I stated firmly. "I want them arrested." Instantly, the men erupted in protest. "That's a lie," one of them shouted. "She invited us. She wanted it." All eyes turned to Sue. Her shoulders hunched, her head bowed, avoiding my gaze. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with shame. "I invited them," she admitted. "Everything that happened, it was consensual." The relief on the men's faces was obvious. No assault charges. They were in the clear. A second police car pulled up moments later. Officers took down everyone's information for the report, then the senior officer turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Legally speaking, there's not much we can do here," he said. "Your wife invited them in, they're all consenting adults, and there's no sign of force or coercion." He paused, then added dryly, "Maybe you two should consider counseling." His tone made it clear what he thought of that idea. I scoffed. "No need. Call her a taxi. She won't be staying here tonight." Sue flinched at my words, but I didn't care. One of the men, realizing they weren't going anywhere on their flat tires, called a cab as well. Then they had the audacity to accuse me of stealing their belongings. "Check my house," I told the officers. "If they can prove I took anything, I'll give it back." Of course, they couldn't. I stepped back onto the porch, watching the group as they waited for their ride. Sue lingered behind, hesitant. Despite my fury, she cautiously approached, her eyes filled with something resembling regret. She had no idea just how much rage I was holding back. "Bobby! I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. I cut her off before she could spew another word. "You shattered my heart, Sue. I'll never forgive you." My tone was ice-cold. "Jeff called you a strumpet. And honestly, I think that fits. So from now on, that's all you are to me. I won't even use your real name." Tears welled in her eyes. "Bobby, please. If you ever need to talk to me again, do it through Tad." With that, I turned on my heel, walked inside, and slammed the door behind me. Through the window, I saw her stumble back toward the group, tears streaming down her face. Jeff reached for her, trying to comfort her, but to my surprise, she pushed him away. For a brief moment, that gave me some satisfaction. But it didn't last. I headed upstairs, dreading what I'd find next. The second I stepped into the bedroom, the overwhelming scent of sweat and cheap cologne hit me like a brick wall. My stomach turned. My hands clenched into fists. Everything, the sheets, the pillows, the bed itself, was tainted. My blood boiled. With a furious growl, I grabbed the mattress and hauled it off the bed, dragging it downstairs and throwing it onto the front lawn. But that wasn't enough. Storming into the garage, I grabbed my toolbox and got to work. One by one, I dismantled every part of the bed, tossing each piece outside. The destruction was cathartic, but the rage inside me still burned. Back in the bedroom, my eyes landed on Sue's cell phone lying on the floor. I picked it up, unlocked it, and started scrolling. What I found made my stomach churn. Photos. Videos. Filthy messages. And the worst part? These weren't just random men. She knew them. Intimately. I let out a bitter laugh at my own blindness. I used to think she was faithful, devoted. That illusion was long gone. I gathered every single box from our bedroom and carried them downstairs, dumping their contents onto the front lawn. I wasn't done yet. The guest room needed the same treatment. Moving methodically, I carried dresser drawers outside one by one, emptying them into separate piles. But when I pulled open the bottom drawer, something resisted. Frowning, I yanked harder. The wood splintered with a sharp crack, and suddenly, the obstruction became clear. 7 or 8 DVDs were wedged beneath the drawer. My breath caught. I picked up one of the cases. It was slightly cracked from my rough handling, but the disc inside was intact. My pulse pounded as I examined them more closely. My gut told me I didn't want to see what was on them. But I had to know. I carried the stack downstairs, staring at the labels. Each one was more gut-wrenching than the last. But it was the first disc that hit me the hardest. Sue. With her best friend, Sarah. At Sarah's house. My wife had spent countless Tuesday and Thursday nights helping Sarah with her Avon parties. Or at least, that's what she told me. Now, I had a feeling she had been helping, in a very different way. As I sifted through hours of footage, it became painfully clear, Sue and Sarah weren't just hosting Avon parties. Their gatherings had a much more intimate purpose, and multiple men were involved. Tears welled in my eyes as I forced myself to watch, but the real gut punch came with the final 2 discs. The first showed Sue with her tennis instructor, the lessons I had paid for. Every Saturday, she'd come home too exhausted for intimacy, and now I understood why. The second? It was filmed at her workplace. In the boardroom. With Jeff, her boss. And Bill Evans, Jeff's superior. Bill wasn't just some executive. He was a well-known figure in the community, frequently featured in newspapers for his charitable contributions. But now, I saw firsthand how his generosity extended into my wife's private life. Swallowing my disgust, I grabbed a large envelope and carefully placed inside it the cell phone, the discs, and the cassette tape from my earlier recording. My next move was clear. I needed legal advice. There were only 2 people I truly trusted, and one of them was Ted Worth, my best friend and longtime attorney. Before heading out, I noticed Sue's laptop sitting on the desk. On a whim, I powered it up and began copying every file, email, photo, and video onto external drives. The process took about an hour, but once it was done, I sat down to comb through her digital archives. What I found only deepened my revulsion. The videos were just as explicit as those on the discs. But then I stumbled upon something worse, images you'd expect to find on certain adult websites. And then there were the emails. Months' worth of correspondence, cleverly disguised under misleading file names. Exchanges between Sue, Jeff, and other men. Messages from Sarah. At first, I thought I could stomach it. But then, one email stopped me cold. For the briefest moment, my mind flickered to my gun. The sheer rage that boiled inside me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. But she wasn't worth it. I had to stay strong. The email was from Sue to Sarah. It was recent, just last week. Sarah had asked why she hadn't left me yet. Why she didn't just embrace single life again. And Sue's response? It shattered me. Sarah, I have no interest in him anymore. Bobby is faithful but foolish. I fear he's starting to suspect my lifestyle, though he's too blind with love to see the full picture. Lately, he's been putting on weight, and honestly, his belly is repulsive. I also hate facial hair, and his mustache makes him look ridiculous. I did love him once, but the excitement I've found over the last few years is too good to give up. The only problem is his lawyer best friend. If he gets involved, things could get complicated. Jeff and Bill keep hinting at promotions and perks if I keep playing along. I laugh. I also want a house. A new car. And if I play my cards right, I could get alimony too. Oh, and I'm looking forward to our Tuesday party, assuming my tennis injury heals in time. Tony was incredible. Make sure you send me last Thursday's video. My first time with so many men at once, wow. As for my dream man? Rich, loyal, easy to control, and not too bright. Someone who caters to my every need and still asks, "Is that okay?" I laugh. As long as he's got money, I don't care about the bedroom. I can get what I need elsewhere. Sometimes, this is just too easy. Damn, Bobby's home. Gotta go. See you Tuesday. Call me. Sue. I read the email again. And again. Each word dripped with cruelty. This was what she thought of me. After everything we had been through? Had I really been so blind? For 2 years, maybe longer, she had been betraying me. I shut the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Eventually, I dozed off on the couch, but my mind never truly rested. The next morning, still exhausted, I called in sick to work. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Ted's office. His longtime secretary, Mary, answered. I had known her nearly as long as I had known him. "Mary, I need to see Ted. Urgently." She sighed. "Bobby, he's in court all day. No way he can get out of it. Tell him I'll be at his office in an hour. If he gives you trouble, just mention Tammy Brown's name." Silence. Then, a low chuckle. "Got it. See you in an hour." I hung up and started getting dressed when my phone rang again. I hesitated, expecting it to be Sue. But the caller ID was unfamiliar. Reluctantly, I answered. "Mr. Thomas, this is Bill Evans from Susan's office. I'd like to discuss last night's events. Would you be available to meet today?" So, he knew. I had no idea if he was aware of the video, but I was certain about one thing. He was worried. Not just about Sue and Jeff, but about his own reputation. He had too much to lose. I kept my tone neutral. "I have an important meeting this morning. I'll call you before noon to arrange something." I let him believe I was open to negotiation. He had no idea what was coming. Stepping outside, I was greeted by a bizarre sight. My front yard looked like the aftermath of a chaotic garage sale. The broken bed. The scattered clothes. A reminder of last night's disaster. An elderly neighbor waved at me from across the street, her face full of curiosity. No doubt, I had become the talk of the neighborhood. A suburban scandal at its finest. Shaking my head, I headed downtown, grabbing a quick bite before making my way to Ted's office. As soon as I walked in, Mary handed me a coffee, lots of cream, no sugar, just the way I liked it. She smirked. Holy crap, Bobby. I don't know what you've got on Ted, but the second I mentioned that name, he cleared his entire schedule. I could use a month off, you know. I chuckled despite myself. If you're curious about who Tammy Brown is, she teased, you'll have to ask him yourself. Just then, the door swung open. Ted strode in, his expression a mix of amusement and concern. Holy crap, Bobby. You must be in serious trouble to use that name. Come on, let's talk. He turned to Mary. No calls, no interruptions. She gave him a mock salute as I grabbed my coffee and followed him into his office. As soon as the door shut behind us, I laid everything out, what had happened last night, what I had discovered, and the full extent of Sue's betrayal. Ted listened carefully, his expression darkening with every word. This was just the beginning. Ted leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. I think it's best if I review these recordings myself before our meeting at 2 p.m., he said. There's no point in putting you through any more emotional distress right now, Bobby. Watching all of this won't do you any good. I nodded, appreciating his wisdom. As much as I wanted to see everything for myself, I wasn't sure I could stomach it. Thanks, Ted, I said sincerely. Before heading out, I shared the good news with Mary. She smirked. If Ted's picking up the tab, you owe me lunch at the most expensive place in town. I chuckled, grateful for the brief moment of levity. We left the office together, and for the next hour, Mary was the perfect dining companion. She had a knack for distracting me from my troubles, even if just temporarily. But reality came crashing back the moment we returned. As we walked into the office, we heard Ted's voice echoing down the hall, cheering. When we stepped inside, we found him at his desk, practically doing a victory dance. These recordings are a game-changer, Bobby. I can't believe what I just saw, he exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. My reaction wasn't as enthusiastic. Seeing the look on my face, his excitement faded. His expression softened with realization. Oh, Bobby, he said, his voice quieter now. I'm really sorry. I got caught up in the legal angle of all this and didn't stop to think about what this means for you personally. I know this has got to be painful. I managed a small nod. Ted motioned for me to come over. You need to see something. Reluctantly, I stepped behind his desk and looked at the screen. Did you watch the full video from the tennis club? He asked. I shook my head. No. I skimmed through some of it last night, but it was hard to watch. I didn't trust myself not to lose it. Ted exhaled. Brace yourself, then. He hit play. The video showed Sue and Tony, her tennis instructor, finishing their little session. But then something unexpected happened. More men appeared in the locker room. A crowd. My stomach churned as I watched Sue glance at them, then gesture them forward. She wasn't just unfaithful. She had turned it into a full-on event. Ted froze the frame. This guy, he said, pointing to the screen. I focused on the man he was indicating, an older guy, wrapped in nothing but a towel. He had long gray hair and a mustache so thick it made him look like a damn walrus. Do you recognize him? Ted asked. I shook my head. No idea. But judging by what I just saw, you do. Ted's lips curled into a grin. Oh, Bobby, you're going to love this. This guy? He's ammunition for our meeting today. He's a board member at the tennis club. A very high-profile one. I narrowed my eyes. And? Ted smirked. And he's going to regret ever stepping into that locker room. I had no idea what he was planning, but I trusted him. Ted wasn't just my best friend, he was one hell of a lawyer. We packed up the evidence, videos, printed photographs, and legal documents, then headed downtown. Our first stop was Sue's office building, where Bill Evans' office was located on the top floor. Sue's office was one floor below. As we waited in the reception area, I felt the distinct sensation of being watched. Glancing down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of someone just before they disappeared around the corner. I had a strong suspicion of who it was. Good. That meant I wouldn't have to face her just yet. A few minutes later, we were ushered into Bill Evans' office. It was as lavish as I expected: leather chairs, expensive artwork, and plaques commemorating his so-called achievements. Photos of him with prominent figures lined the walls. A bitter thought crossed my mind. Had he ever brought Sue here? If I wasn't already disgusted with the man, that idea sealed it. I introduced Ted, then got straight to business. Mr. Evans, this is my attorney and friend, Ted Worth. He'll be sitting in on this meeting. Bill extended his hand, though I could see the faintest flicker of hesitation. Mr. Thomas, Bob, I thought this was meant to be a private discussion between us. I decided otherwise, I said firmly. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Ted. He accepted my response without further argument, though I could tell he wasn't thrilled. He turned his full attention to me, as if Ted wasn't even in the room. Ted just smirked, knowing exactly what was happening. Bill leaned forward. Bob, may I call you Bob? Go ahead. I thought it might be beneficial to have Jeff Davis join us as well, I said casually. This concerns him too, doesn't it? Bill hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. He pressed a button on his intercom. Julie, tell Jeff I need him in my office immediately. Drop everything. Understood, sir. He turned back to me, adopting a practiced, sympathetic expression. First off, Bob, I want to sincerely apologize for any trouble Jeff and Sue have caused you. I can only imagine how difficult last night must have been. Difficult? That was an understatement. But I believe if we work together, he continued, we can find a solution that benefits all parties. I leaned back in my chair. What exactly do you mean by that? Before he could answer, the door opened, and Jeff stepped inside. The moment his eyes landed on me, he froze. For a second, I thought he might turn and bolt. But Bill gestured for him to take a seat. Reluctantly, Jeff complied. He never looked me in the eye. And that was just fine with me. Because in a few moments, he wouldn't be able to look at anyone. Bill leaned forward, clasping his hands together as if he were about to deliver some heartfelt speech. I just want to make one thing clear. I have great affection for Sue. Almost like a daughter, he began. Ted, who had been silent up until now, seized the moment. Oh? Are you saying you have a penchant for incest, Mr. Evans? He interrupted smoothly. Bill's head snapped up, his face contorting in shock. What? What are you suggesting? Incest? What the hell does that even mean? I fought the urge to laugh, immediately recognizing Ted's strategy. He had thrown Bill off balance, and it was working. Ted leaned in, a smug smile creeping across his face. Well, let's just say a picture is worth 1,000 words. He reached into his bag, pulled out a folder, and casually placed it on Bill's desk. Then, he set down a portable DVD player. These, Ted said, sliding a few printed screenshots toward Jeff, are from the video you're about to watch. Jeff took one look at the images and turned pale. His hands trembled as he passed them to Bill, who slowly examined them. It was all there. Unmistakable. Bill. Jeff. My wife. In his boardroom. Caught in the act. For a long moment, Bill said nothing. Then, his head jerked up. Jeff, are you telling me you were stupid enough to record this and, God help us, distribute copies? His voice was barely above a whisper, his disbelief obvious. Jeff opened his mouth but no words came out. He looked completely blindsided, as if he had never considered how this might blow up in his face. Ted cleared his throat, reclaiming control of the conversation. Well, Mr. Evans, let me tell you how this is going to play out. He shot Jeff a cold glance. And just to clarify, I'm not just Bobby's friend. I'm his lawyer. Bill exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He already knew he had lost control of the situation. Ted continued, his voice measured but firm. First, Sue stays at her job, No exceptions. Bobby believes she's going to need employment, and from what we've seen, she fits in rather well here. He smirked slightly, knowing exactly how that statement would land. Bill said nothing, his jaw clenched. Second, Ted went on. Jeff is done here. Sue stays, Jeff goes. I turned my attention to Jeff, whose face had gone sheet white. And third, Ted added, leaning in slightly, we expect a monetary offer, one that respects our intelligence. We'll entertain your initial proposal, and you'll receive a yes or no from us within 5 business days. If you try to lowball us, we'll proceed with legal action in less than 2 months. Possibly sooner. Before Bill or Jeff could react, Ted pressed play on the DVD player. The room was silent except for the sound of the video. The footage rolled. There they were, Bill and Jeff, caught red-handed, repeatedly engaging in their extracurricular activities with my wife in the boardroom. Jeff didn't need to watch. He already knew exactly what was on that screen. Bill, however, sat frozen, mouth slightly open, his mind undoubtedly racing. He was calculating. How much was this going to cost him? His business? His marriage? His reputation? I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. After a long pause, Bill exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to regain composure. Jeff, he said quietly, we'll need to have a serious conversation about your future here after these gentlemen leave. Jeff flinched. Bill straightened his tie. I'll consult with legal counsel to negotiate a settlement for you. But let's be clear, if this gets out, our entire business could take a hit. Ted tilted his head slightly, studying him. Don't worry, Mr. Evans. Your secrets are safe for now, provided you make a serious offer. Bill sighed but nodded. But, Ted added, I wouldn't be too hasty about firing Jeff just yet. Bill's brows knitted together. And why's that? Well, Ted said, adjusting his cufflinks. He might have additional copies of this video. And if he does, that gives him leverage. If we don't act wisely, he could decide to use it against you. Bill turned to Jeff, his expression darkening. Jeff swallowed hard. Oh, and just so you're aware, Ted continued, his tone almost playful, both of you could face legal consequences for engaging in relations with an employee. That alone could impact your employment status and future prospects. Either of them spoke. Ted and I stood. Ted reached for the DVD player and the stack of photographs, reclaiming our evidence before anything could disappear. We turned and headed for the door, leaving Bill and Jeff staring at each other, both realizing they were on the verge of turning on one another. Before we stepped out, I caught movement from the hallway. Sue. She had been lurking just around the corner, trying to eavesdrop. Ted smirked and placed a hand on my shoulder. Wait for it. Seconds later, Bill's voice boomed through the intercom. Julie, get Sue Thomas in here. Now. A grin tugged at my lips. This was about to get interesting. Once we were outside, I turned to Ted, my curiosity getting the better of me. Why'd you give Jeff an escape route? I asked. You suggested he could use his own tape against Bill. Why help him? Ted grinned knowingly. Divide and conquer. If they're united, they're stronger. If we make them distrust each other, they'll start working against themselves. And when that happens? He clapped a hand on my back. We get what we want. I nodded slowly, realizing just how calculated this whole thing was. Ted smirked. And don't forget, both of these guys have families. They go to church. No matter how depraved they are in those tapes, they'll do anything to keep this from their wives, their kids, their congregation. I exhaled. He was right. Looking up at the towering office building, a thought struck me. This place. Once, it had just been my wife's workplace. Now, it was the scene of my deepest betrayal. Ted must have noticed the shift in my expression because he clapped his hands together. All right, he said, snapping me out of my thoughts. Let's grab a beer before our next rendezvous at the tennis club at 4 p.m. He grinned. I think we've earned a drink. And besides, there's something I need to discuss with you. I'm not entirely sure how yet, Ted admitted as we drove across town toward the tennis club. Before heading to our meeting, we made a quick stop at a small bar restaurant right next to the club. Ted ordered 2 beers, took a sip, and got straight to business. "Bobby, I expect Bill Evans will make an offer," he began. "But it'll probably be just under $1 million. His legal team is sharp, I've dealt with them before, but Bill is also a realist. He knows what's at stake." Ted leaned in slightly. "I'll call him tomorrow and make it clear, a lowball offer won't do him any favors. Not for his business, not for his personal life. I'll push for $3 million. If he refuses, we walk away and take things to court." He paused, taking another sip of his beer before continuing. "Now, if we go the legal route, I need to know, do I have your full authorization to drag Sue's name through the mud? I won't hold back, Bobby. If this goes to trial, I'll paint the most damning picture possible. It's going to get ugly, and it'll be highly publicized. Every skeleton in your marriage, your private life, even your sex life, could be exposed." I exhaled slowly. "I've thought about this," I admitted. "And yeah, I have more integrity than they give me credit for. But if it comes down to it, I'm ready to go all the way. That said, I'd prefer to explore the financial settlement first. If Bill makes a decent offer, I'll take it. If not, you do what you have to do." Ted nodded. "Fair enough. We'll let Bill make the first move, but if he tries to screw us over, I'll be ready." He took another sip, then smirked. "And just so you know, I've got a few media contacts lined up, 3 local news stations and a newspaper that would love to get their hands on this story. If Bill thinks he can bury this quietly, he's dead wrong. Even if we have to blur out certain details for public broadcast, the message will be crystal clear." I sighed. "Ted, I trust you. You've always had my back. I just wish this never happened. Being an oblivious husband was a hell of a lot easier than being humiliated like this." Ted clinked his beer against mine. "I get it, Bobby. But you didn't start this. You're just finishing it." I nodded. "All right," he said, shifting gears. "Let's talk about our next meeting. This guy, Harry Riel, is the owner of Ace Tennis Club. You remember him, right? The guy in the video I showed you at my office?" I grimaced. "Yeah. Hard to forget." Ted leaned forward. "Here's the deal, he's going to play it cool. He'll brush it off like it's no big deal, claim that adults will be adults and that the club isn't responsible. Maybe, just for appearances, he'll fire Tony, but don't expect it to stick. Tony's popular, especially with the female members. And while the men pay most of the club dues, the women aren't just spectators. They're stakeholders. That dynamic is going to be key in how we handle this." I nodded, taking it all in as we finished our drinks. By the time we arrived at the club, it was clear from the start, Riel and Ted didn't like each other. The tension was thick. Riel leaned back in his chair, his expression one of pure disinterest. Ted wasted no time. "Mr. Riel, this is Bob Thomas," he said, gesturing toward me. "His wife is a paying member of your club. We recently uncovered proof that Tony Simba, your tennis instructor, was having an affair with Mrs. Thomas. We'd like to know how you plan to handle this." Riel barely blinked. "Listen," he said. "What 2 consenting adults do behind closed doors is none of my business." He turned his gaze to me. "And as for you, Mr. Thomas, if you can't satisfy your wife in the bedroom, don't come crying to me when she strays." A smug grin crept onto his face. "Plenty of unhappy spouses come through Ace Tennis Club. Some keep coming back for the personalized attention my staff provides." He winked. I saw red. My fist clenched, and for a split second, I was ready to launch across the desk and shut him up myself. Ted, sensing it, placed a firm hand on my wrist under the table. "Stay cool," he murmured. "Follow my lead." Then, he leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You see, Harry," Ted said smoothly, "you're making a few assumptions. You assume this happened off the clock. That you weren't aware. That you didn't condone it." Ted pulled the portable DVD player from his bag and placed it on Riel's desk. "Those are bold assumptions." He pressed play. The moment the footage started rolling, Riel's smirk disappeared. His fingers twitched, like he wanted to reach out and stop the video, but he didn't dare. Ted let it play for a solid 30 seconds before pausing. Riel cleared his throat, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Ted seized the moment. "Harry," he said, his tone now razor-sharp. "You, with full knowledge and cooperation from your staff, allowed this to happen. You knowingly permitted a paying member, Mrs. Susan Thomas, a married woman whose membership fees were paid by her husband, to become part of your little extracurricular activities." Ted paused for effect, then delivered the final blow. "When this gets out, every dues-paying man in this club is going to start asking himself one question. Is my wife doing the same thing?" Riel's jaw tightened. He was stuck. He knew it. I could already see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out his next move. And Ted and I? We were just getting started. "I'll have to subpoena everyone who was in that locker room that day," Ted mused as we drove across town. "Something tells me the married men involved won't be thrilled about that." His tone was almost casual, as if he were enjoying the thought of Riel's inevitable downfall. He wasn't finished. "And let's not forget the reasonable expectation of privacy when filming inside a locker room, Harry," he added, shaking his head. "Once I'm through with you, your club's reputation will be in ruins. And your finances? Let's just say you might want to start looking for a cheaper hobby." Riel stayed silent, his jaw tight as he processed the implications. Ted leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make it clear he wasn't bluffing. "Here's what we want: a substantial financial settlement. And immediate action. Cooperate, and you might avoid a world of inconvenience and financial loss." For a long moment, Riel just sat there. Then, he exhaled heavily. "Ted, you're still a real piece of work," he muttered. "But I can't argue with your reasoning." He rubbed his temples, clearly calculating his next move. "I'll reach out tomorrow with an offer. But if I agree, I expect all copies of those tapes returned to me. And I want a guarantee that this stays buried. Oh, and Tony's out," he added bitterly. "I'll fire him today." Ted smirked. "Good to hear." Riel glared. "If that's all you legal extortionists came for, get the hell out." Ted grabbed the DVD player, powered it off with a grin, and turned toward the door. "Oh, and Harry," he said over his shoulder, "say hi to Tito Martin for me." "Go to hell, Worth." Riel spat back. Ted just chuckled all the way to the parking lot. "That was fun," he said, shaking his head. "Now we wait." That night, over dinner at Ted's place, we went over the numbers. By the end of the week, Bill Evans offered $2.7 million to keep Sue as an employee. Jeff Davis? He was done. The idiot handed over all his tapes to Bill, thinking it would protect him. Instead, Bill fired him on the spot, leaving Jeff without a job or leverage. Then I turned my attention to the two men I caught with my wife the night I walked in on her. Both were high-profile clients of Jeff's. And neither of them wanted any publicity, for their companies or themselves. Each offered me $1 million to make sure their names never saw the light of day. And then there was Riel. He refused to negotiate. Told us to take him to court. So we did. By the time we were finished, he had lost $3 million, his club had hemorrhaged members, and he was forced to sell it altogether. He thought he could get away with it. The judge disagreed. As for Sue, she got what she wanted, a house and a car, but not a dime in alimony. I only saw her twice after that, both times in court. Each time, I greeted her with the same name Jeff had given her. "Hello, Strumpet." Both times, she burst into tears. I always wondered why she cried now, when she never shed a tear before destroying my life. Guilt? Regret? Or just the realization that she had lost control? Either way, it didn't matter. Ted's advice had made me richer than I ever imagined. But even with all that money, the scars of that year never fully faded. The betrayal, the humiliation, it still haunted me. And then, just like that, the past came rushing back. I hadn't even realized I was lost in thought until a voice snapped me back to reality. Sir? Are you all right? I blinked. The restaurant manager stood beside me, looking concerned. I shook my head, clearing the fog. Yeah, sorry. Just reminiscing. He nodded, though I could tell he was still watching me curiously, like he'd look at an old man lost in a daydream. Then I turned my attention back to what I had come for. I walked toward my ex-wife's table. Her expression shifted the second she saw me. Shock, confusion, and something else. The last time we were together, I had been overweight, unkempt, nursing an old knee injury from baseball. That was my excuse back then. The truth? I had settled. I had let myself become complacent. Not anymore. Now my hair was neatly cut, my body lean from regular workouts, and my knee was fully repaired courtesy of the money I took from Jeff and Bill's pockets. I wore a well-tailored suit, my shoes polished, my posture confident. I had come a long way from the broken man she left behind. I spoke first. You look fantastic today, Strumpet, I said smoothly. Almost forgot how stunning you could be. Her eyes flickered with emotion. My name is Susan, she snapped, irritation clear in her voice. Why can't you address me by my real name? I smirked. I didn't give you that name, I reminded her. You know who did. I just find it fitting. Her expression wavered. I warned you 3 years ago that you shattered my heart, I continued, and that I'd always remember you by that title. The man beside her stiffened, clearly annoyed. He started to rise, but Sue placed a hand on his arm, silently telling him to stay put. Tears welled in her eyes, smudging her makeup. Her boyfriend turned to her. Go freshen up, Sue. Fix your face. I'll handle this idiot for you. She hesitated, looking back at me. And for the briefest moment, I saw something behind her eyes. Maybe lingering guilt. Maybe regret. Maybe something else. Either way, she turned and walked toward the restroom. As she wiped her eyes, I caught a glimpse of the sizable engagement ring on her finger. I turned my attention back to the man. You must be Bob Thomas, he said flatly. Sue's ex-husband. That's right, I replied, studying him. And you must be the man she's been dreaming of. His jaw tightened. I'm Sue's CFO. And if I were you, I'd watch your words. I smirked. Relax. I just want to talk. I leaned in slightly. 3 questions. That's all. And then I'll be out of your life forever. He frowned, wary but curious. 3 questions? I nodded. That's right. Then I met his gaze and said, I've been in your shoes before. And trust me, I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. I suppose the strumpet painted me as a terrible husband. I mused, my tone calm but pointed. Neglectful? Abusive? A womanizer, maybe? I studied him carefully. I know exactly what she's told you. But I'm not here to salvage my reputation. Honestly, I doubt it would make any difference. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. First question, I continued. Does Sarah still host her Avon gatherings on Tuesdays and Thursdays? He furrowed his brows. Sue helps Sarah with her decor sales on Mondays and Wednesdays, he corrected smugly. Looks like your memory is failing you. I smirked. All right. Second question, does she still take tennis lessons on Saturdays? She swings a racket on Sundays. He shot back, his confidence growing. For someone who was married to her for so long, you seem a little hazy on the details. I let his smugness linger for a moment before delivering the final question. Last one, I said, my voice even. Have you ever checked under the bottom drawer of the dresser in your living room? He blinked, caught off guard. No. Why the hell would I? I leaned back. Because those 3 questions? They're the exact reasons we're no longer together. Silence stretched between us. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a worn, creased piece of paper. This, I said, sliding it across the table, is an email from another woman, one of many, that Sue corresponded with. Sarah asked how she planned to get rid of me before I found out the truth. This was her response. I tapped the paper. After I read that letter, I realized something. I never really knew her. And honestly, I probably still don't. He stared at the folded paper but didn't reach for it. His hesitation was obvious, but so was his curiosity. I've carried this email with me for 3 years, I admitted. Not because I'm holding on to the past, but because it was the one thing that truly broke me. Of all the evidence, the videos, the texts, the legal documents, this hit the hardest. His fingers finally twitched, reaching forward. He opened the letter and began reading. I watched him carefully. His eyes darted across the page. His posture stiffened. Then, without a word, he grabbed a pen, scribbled something on the letter, and abruptly stood up. No glance back. No thanks. Nothing. His face remained unreadable as he strode out of the restaurant. Frowning, I leaned over and read what he had written at the bottom of the email. I'll return home shortly. Please wait here, and I'll call you in 15 minutes. I need to check under the bottom drawer of my living room dresser. Be right back. Peter. I sat back, exhaling slowly. I had seen that look before. That moment when someone realizes the truth, the ugly, undeniable truth. It didn't matter whether he liked what I had told him. Something inside him knew I was right. And now, he had to see it for himself. I stood up, leaving a note on Sue's table. There was no way in hell I was staying in that restaurant a second longer. On my way out, I pulled out my phone and called my client, letting them know I needed to reschedule. They didn't mind, they were running late anyway. Before leaving, I stole one last glance at Sue's table. She had just returned, her eyes scanning the room for Peter. But instead, she found it. The old email. And Peter's note. Her face drained of color. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the paper, rereading the words she had written all those years ago, the ones she never thought would come back to haunt her. Then, as she reached the bottom and saw Peter's message, I watched as realization dawned. Her lips parted, her breath hitching. Then, her shoulders shook. And in the middle of that crowded restaurant, she broke down in tears. The sobs were so intense that heads turned. Conversations quieted. I felt a flicker of pity. But mostly, I felt nothing at all. That was the last time I ever saw her. I still wonder if Peter found something under that drawer. Something told me Sue's reaction meant he did.